I'm in central London, next to the HMS Belfast, and in this virtual nature tour, I'd like to talk a bit about the River Thames. What's interesting, my father was a fire runner during the London Blitz, and so he had lots of lovely stories that I would like to share. Looking upstream to HMS Belfast and the modern buildings of the City of London, and then one of the oldest, the very famous Tower of London, so important in our history, and of course built by William the Conqueror. And then probably the most iconic landmark of all, Tower Bridge. What I'd like to do is look downstream from the bridge to talk a bit more about the London docks. Now on Tower Bridge, if I pan downstream, until the 1960s, this had been lined with cranes for all the ships coming, all the cargo coming in to be unloaded or loaded in the middle of London docks. And this area, which just downstream from Tower of London, was the centre of the docks. For example, in the Elizabethan times, right to the 1800s. But then they started to need larger docks for larger ships, so further downstream, places like the Isle of Dogs, places like Surrey Docks, Greenland Dock, and also the Royal Dock, even further downstream, became more important. But what I want to come to next is just over here. I'm looking at St Catherine's Dock, which is one of the oldest docks. Lots of famous people left from St Catherine's Dock, because until Tower Bridge was built, it was right next to the St Catherine's Dock, was right next to the Tower of London. You can just see in the shot here. So now I'm on the middle of Tower Bridge looking at Tower of London, and as I mentioned before, Tower Bridge was built right next to the Tower of London. Pan around to it here. You can see the entrance now. This was the entrance to St Catherine's Dock. Now it's a very posh yacht basin, because it's the furthest upstream a yacht can come without having to open up Tower Bridge. Very important historically as an old dock. I've been to Antarctica, and there's a beach called Yankee Harbour, where there's the remains of the stuff left behind by the sealers in 1820, and there's a sealer's pot with St Catherine's Dock, London stamped on the side of the sealing pot. In more recent history, if you had been here at the height of the Blitz, basically the whole Dockland area of London would have been burning due to the bombs and the incendiaries. And I will be talking a bit more about the impact of the Blitz and the stories of my father, who I mentioned earlier was a fire runner when he was 17 during the Blitz, during the summer and autumn of 1940. Just downstream from Tower Bridge, looking very nice in the early morning sunlight. I'm on the north bank, close to St Catherine's Dock, and if I look to the south bank, you've got all the what used to be the warehouses from when they were docks. Now all very upmarket developments and shopping centres and places to eat. Now a lot of this area is completely burnt out during the Blitz, and obviously some of these would have been bomb damaged, but a lot of the damage was done by fires, and these warehouses were so well built, although the roofs would have collapsed, the walls remained intact, so they were able to rebuild at the end of the war, and it became docks once again until the landscape completely changed from the 1970s when we had freight going out of the big container ports. And particularly during the 80s, the whole area was rather run down, but much more active now, but very strange to be here. This is the first day we've got a bit more freedom to wander around, and strange to have so few people around. Now at the entrance to St Catherine's Dock, at the moment its gate is closed because it's a low tide. I'm looking up through the entrance into the yacht basin. But it's amazing to think of the number of ships which would have sailed around the world from this location. Handing around from the entrance to St Catherine's Dock into the dock itself. Very quiet at the moment, but I said a very posh yacht basin, very popular to have like music playing and people to go out and have a bite to eat. What's interesting, there's actually been a dock here since the 12th century. It was actually built during the time of King Stephen and Queen Matilda. So just think the number of famous seafarers like Drake would have visited these docks. As I mentioned, the sealers left from here to go to Antarctica in 1820, but then it wasn't a tidal dock. They had to wait for the tide to go up before going out, and it was in 1828 that the dock was made into a tidal dock in 1828. So it's interesting, the history of the dock up to that time, and for a while it was still the most important dock, but as ships got larger it became too small and there was more dock development downstream. But as I said, whenever I'm in Antarctica, particularly, I don't get there too often. If I get to Yankee Harbour, I haven't found it recently, and I do wonder where someone sadly has taken it. There were the remains of a sealer's pot with St Catherine's Dock, London, stamped on it, and that was from 1820. Back on Tower Bridge, looking at Tower of London with the buildings around the City of London beyond. You can see the Traitor's Gate. Obviously now there's a towpath along the riverside of the Tower of London, but originally it used to be the river right up to the edge of the wall, and you can see the entrance to Traitor's Gate here. Of course, over the years, various famous people had their head chopped off. The most famous was Anne Boleyn. Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn courted at Greenwich Palace and the surrounding area, now obviously a very famous historical area in regard to maritime Britain. But when it came to Anne Boleyn being beheaded here at the Tower of London, Henry VIII wasn't present. He was actually hunting further upstream in Richmond, what we now know as Richmond Park. And when she finally had her head chopped off, they fired the guns, and you heard them from Richmond Park when he was hunting, knowing that Anne Boleyn, that was it, she'd gone. Look at the building known as the Walkie Talkie, just above Traitor's Gate. And I pan around looking upstream to south of the river. You have the Shard and City Hall, and lots of new buildings because so much of the South Bank was completely destroyed during the Blitz in World War II. And this is something else I'd like to talk more about as I head back upstream towards Waterloo Bridge. Looking across to Tower Bridge, back down on the South Bank, past the Walkie Talkie, HMS Belfast. I'm right next to City Hall, view of the Shard, and just here is the Scoop. Very quiet, and I find it very sad with the lockdown. Normally, just over a year ago, I would have been dancing here. They always had lots of different themes each week, like salsa or Brazilian zouk. And I really miss those times when I'm up in London. Normally I'd come up perhaps like now, wander around, explore, perhaps go to a talk, and also do some dancing. And I'm really looking forward to those days when we get back to the normal, well, the new normal. Looking across from the South Bank to the City of London with the old Custom House just in front. And what I'm going to explain about during the rest of my wander up the river is the reason we have this patchwork mixture of old buildings and new buildings in the centre of London. Now in Hayes Galleria, a nice place to go shopping or have a drink, but of course still in lockdown. And as I mentioned, there's a lot of these areas would have been destroyed by fire or partially damaged by the bombs in the Second World War. They're very robust buildings, so they're able to rebuild them. And there were docks again for a number of years, then became derelict in the 1980s, but now is are really nice places to come to visit and wander around London. Now on London Bridge, with a couple of London Red buses going past. If I look back up to the city here, it's a bit difficult to see. I just pan in a bit. Partially hidden over the building is a little golden spike. It's part of the monument to the Great Fire of London, which utterly destroyed a vast area of London. And of course it was after this, if I look further upstream, we have St Paul's. I want to talk a bit more about St Paul's in a minute, and particularly about the Blitz. But what I'm going to do next is go a bit further along the South Bank. It's because there's very much a division between the North Bank and the South Bank, and you have things like Shakespeare's Globe Theatre here, and it's rather considered a dodgy area with lots of boozing, prostitutes, and lots of debauchery. And you really have to think of Shakespeare's plays being done more like sort of a pantomime rather than what I do get frustrated today, like I am an actor. It was far more pantomime-like when a lot of the plays were actually put on for people to enjoy. Not too far upstream on the South Bank from London Bridge, and this is a replica of Sir Francis Drake's Golden Hind. He was very famous for his voyage around the world. Over the years I've come here many times. I think whilst it's closed off, they're doing some work on it in a moment. Been here many times, but I never thought I'd actually cross the Drake Passage. Now I've done that many times, sailing to Antarctica, to the Antarctic Peninsula and back. But yeah, the replica of Sir Francis Drake's Golden Hind. This is the replica of Shakespeare's Globe Theatre. It's great to feel the atmosphere inside. As I mentioned earlier, I do get a bit frustrated with the way Shakespeare is taught. For example, at school, you have to read the play. My argument, you don't read the script for Monty Python, you go and watch Monty Python, and if you find it really funny and you're a bit nerdy, you might then read the play. So I do think the way Shakespeare was taught at school was about the worst thing you could do to put kids off Shakespeare. And the other thing I also do believe, the way it's sort of very upmarket, I'm an actor, is again it misses the point. It was much more bawdy when these plays were put on. So I do recommend, if you do come to London, is get the real feel of what the Shakespeare play must have been like by coming to the Globe Theatre. And as I pan around, you've got one of the newest bridges, the Millennium Bridge, which goes across to St Paul's. And next I'll go to the bridge to talk more about St Paul's and the Blitz. This lovely view on the Millennium Bridge of St Paul's, and it's great to see things like the Millennium Bridge, and also further upstream the Millennium Mill. Lots of rebuilding, lots of positive outlooks from the beginning of the 21st century. The whole was getting rather run down in the 1970s, and for a while this view of St Paul's was blocked by buildings, so it's really good to have this lovely view. Of course, what's very famous about St Paul's is that famous picture from the height of the Blitz, with the whole of London burning around St Paul's and people struggling to save the building. Well, as I mentioned, my father was a fire runner in the Second World War to basically alert firemen, but also help to put out the fires. His places were actually destroyed by bombs, but most of London was destroyed by fires because of the incendiaries, and one of my dad's job was to stamp out the incendiaries. He was actually around Westminster, others were around, for example, Buckingham Palace, and others are around St Paul's. So what it meant They struggle, but they managed to stop these areas from being burned down, although some would have been partially bomb damaged. But it meant nearby areas were left to burn. For example, areas around our railway stations, London, were left to burn to the ground. And if I pan around to the South Bank, most of the South Bank was left to burn to the ground, apart from the warehouses, which were more robust. And so next I'd like to take you to the Oxo Tower, and just finally a view of the Tate Modern, a bit in the shade, but another highlight today. It's really good, the recovery of the peregrine. And peregrines, I imagine they're best about to start breeding on top of the tower here, right in the middle of London. Now looking slightly upstream to Waterloo Bridge, which is my favourite bridge in London because of the views upstream and downstream. So a very special place. I'm now on Waterloo Bridge looking downriver to the east, and you've got the view of the City of London, St Paul's. And on the right side of the picture, we've got all the tall buildings. We can just about see is the Oxo Tower. You'll be familiar with Oxo cubes. Well, this was the Oxo Tower. And before all the more modern buildings were constructed, is up to World War II, it was one of the tallest buildings on the South Bank. And my father always said at the height of the London Blitz, basically the whole South Bank was destroyed by bombs or by fire. And the one building left completely intact was the Oxo Tower, which became a symbol for Londoners that we will survive the Blitz. I do apologise for all the noise, they're busy doing some work here, but in regards to the Oxo Tower, it was one of the tallest buildings on the South Bank during World War II. It's very difficult to see if you walk along the South Bank because of the surrounding large warehouses and the new and modern buildings. But do appreciate that at the height of World War II, at the height of the Blitz, it's one of the few buildings left unscathed on the whole South Bank. And ignoring all the noise, there's this lovely green space. It's Coin Street. They fought for it during the 1970s. They were redeveloping some of the buildings. Some areas were still actually bomb sites from the Second World War, but they were worried the whole area would be developed with nowhere for the public, and they fought and won the battle. And we can really thank the people of Coin Street for these open spaces and the way we can walk all along the south bank of the river. I'm now back on the Waterloo Bridge, this side on the north side looking upstream. I do apologise, it's a bit windy, so there's a bit of wind in the background. But what I really like about this view, as I go further upstream, you've got a white hall, the Houses of Parliament, and the Houses of Parliament is where my father was a fire runner during the Blitz in World War II when he was 17, 19 and 40. And just the stress is, although lots of areas were bomb damaged, most of London was destroyed by incendiaries. Basically the sulphur fell down and would keep burning. One of my jobs for my father was to stamp out the incendiaries. As we pan further around, we've got the more modern developments like the Millennium Wheel. And we've got one of the boats going past, but very quiet because we're still in a lockdown. You've got the Millennium Wheel, but also just here is, again, apologies for the wind, it's Royal Festival Hall. This is built on the site of, the whole area was blitzed. On site in 1951 they had the Festival of Britain and they kept the Royal Festival Hall. So it's really good to see the old and the new Royal Festival Hall, the Millennium Wheel. The final thing, if I just pan around here to the North Bank, panning closer, there are these stone lions along the Embankment. Of course the Embankment never used to be there, the river used to go further back. I'd like to talk. The final topic is about the lions drinking London in danger of flooding. So just see where those lions are. I'll get closer in a moment. You understand why when the lions are drinking, how London's in danger of flooding, because you have the embankment with the wall, but the mouth of the lion is roughly at foot level. I'll get a bit closer now to explain more about this. Before I go down to explain about the lions drinking, one more view from Waterloo Bridge on the north side, looking upstream towards the House of Parliament, Millennium Mill, Royal Festival Hall, London bus going past, and then if I pan around, you've got the view to the south. So you can understand why I've always loved the view from this bridge. Looking around to Cleopatra's Needle, and the trees, it's still winter, but these trees are the London plane. And what it is, if I get a bit closer, is they were planted all around London because they're adapted to pollution. I mean, London is much cleaner now, but the idea was the bark falls off, and so that's how the tree would cope with the pollution, is the bark would drop off. And you can see some of the bark down here. A bit closer well there. It's a London plane, very famous tree, which is planted all the way around London. Now on the Thames Embankment with people walking past. Called the Victoria Embankment. It was built during that time. Before then it was the river. So if you're ever walking along or driving along, you see some very grand road entrances up to buildings. In many cases these are older buildings where it used to be the way the boat used to come in to the building. But anyway, just where I am here, if you see the wall here, the height of the wall and ground level, if I go on the outside, I'll give you a better view as well. Can you see the line there with the ring where a boat in theory could tie up? Well, they said in London, when the lions drink, London is in danger of flooding. That's because that mouth is the level where my foot is on the other side of the bank. And I remember coming here once when the river was so high, it was actually over the head of the lion, and literally I could have leaned over the wall here and easily touched the surface of the River Thames, which was 2 foot higher. It was almost up to the lip you can see here. And one of the reasons they reckon it actually, there was a couple of places where it leaked through the cracks, but one of the reasons London did not flood, they had already put the Thames barrier in place. So that's going to give you a better view of the lion. So now at the site of the Egyptian obelisk on the north bank. So why is it here? Well, I'll get a bit closer to the plaque on the side. So you can see this plaque on the side of the obelisk, donated by the Egyptian government to thank Nelson Abercrombie after the Battle of the Nile in 1819. So a view of one of the Sphinx. I'm looking at downstream, and actually it was, I'm trying to think, it was just here by Waterloo Bridge or a little bit further downstream. It's where Scott's Discovery used to be moored. He's obviously famous again for his quest for the South Pole. It's where the Discovery used to be moored until it was taken up to Dundee in Scotland. But anyway, finally, here is the lion, the stone lion. London is in danger of flooding when the lion drinks because the mouth is at the foot level of the embankment. And with the person running past, I have seen it with the river right over the top of the head. So you can see just literally a couple of inches from flowing over the top and flooding London. I do hope you've enjoyed my tour along the River Thames. So I do have my St Kilda hat on just to keep the sun out of my eyes, and it's such a disappointment not being able to cruise. It'll be the second spring I will not be exploring the UK coastline, but keeping my fingers crossed that hopefully Noble Caledonia are planning later on this summer. Things go in the right direction to have some UK cruises. Could be great to get back to St Kilda. But finally, just remember, if you ever go to the Noble Caledonia office and you go from walk up from Victoria Station, a lot of the area around Victoria Station was destroyed during the Blitz. The area around where Noble Caledonia is in Knightsbridge it actually did a bit better because of Buckingham Palace nearby. There's a lot of effort to put out the fires. If you come out of Noble Caledonia and head up to Hyde Park Corner, you go past the very grand Lansdowne Hotel. Well, it used to be St George's Hospital, and June the 21st, 1957, in a heat wave, I was born at St George's Hospital. So if I ever become famous, I would have a blue plaque on that grand building. But I do hope you've enjoyed my quick tour of London. Thanks a lot to my father with all his amazing stories he's had from his time, particularly during the as a firefighter or fire runner in the Second World War. Thank you.